The kingdom's strongest healers said the Alpha King was dying, but the strange part was this: every morning, he woke up with pine needles in his hair and moonlight in his memory. No one in the Northern Territories understood what was happening to King Lucian Blackthorn. Not the royal physicians who checked his pulse every dawn. Not the ancient scholars who spent their lives studying forgotten curses. And certainly not the council members who whispered behind closed doors whenever they thought he could not hear them. For nearly 6 months, the most powerful Alpha King in the realm had been growing weaker. Not dramatically. Not in a way that inspired panic. It was something quieter than that. More unsettling. Every morning he rose from his bed looking as though he had spent the entire night wandering through the wilderness. His boots were often dusted with dirt despite being polished before bedtime. His cloak occasionally carried the scent of wildflowers from places miles away from the capital. Sometimes there were scratches on nearby tree bark discovered by royal scouts, strange markings that seemed to match the height and stride of the king himself. Yet every guard stationed outside his chambers swore he never left. Every locked door remained locked. Every window stayed shut. Lucian himself remembered nothing. First he dismissed it. A ruler carried burdens. Sleepless nights were common. But then came the exhaustion. It settled deeper each week, like a cold winter slowly creeping beneath a door. He could still command armies. Still attend ceremonies. Still silence a crowded hall with a single glance. Yet beneath the polished armor and steady voice, something was draining him one silent night at a time. In the capital city of Blackthorn Keep, rumors traveled faster than ravens. Some believed an old enemy had placed a curse on the king. Others claimed the moon goddess herself was punishing him for a forgotten mistake. A few insisted that shadows followed him after sunset, though no one could agree on what those shadows meant. Lucian ignored them all. He had no patience for superstition. But even he could not ignore what happened every morning when he looked in the mirror. His silver-gray eyes appeared more tired than the day before. His reflection seemed distant somehow, as if part of him had traveled somewhere he could not reach. One particularly cold October morning, a royal healer named Margaret gently placed a cup of tea before him and spoke words no one else dared say aloud. "Your Majesty, whatever is happening to you is not happening while you're awake." Lucian stared into the steam curling above the cup. "Then where is it happening?" Margaret hesitated. "That is exactly what frightens me. Hundreds of miles away, beyond the mountains and deep forests bordering the kingdom, a young woman named Clara Whitmore knew nothing about royal meetings or worried healers. Her world was smaller, simpler. A weathered cottage sat alone near the edge of Silverpine Forest, nearly 3 miles from the nearest village. Most people considered the location too isolated. Clara preferred it that way. The cottage had belonged to her grandmother. Its stone chimney leaned slightly to one side. Ivy climbed the walls. Wind chimes made from polished river glass sang softly whenever autumn breezes drifted through the trees. Life there followed predictable rhythms. Morning tea, garden work, reading beside the fireplace, quiet evenings beneath the stars. And yet, during the last week, something had changed. Every night shortly after midnight, Clara heard music. Not from an instrument. Not from a traveler. A voice. Soft. Melancholy. Beautiful. The sound floated through the darkness like a forgotten lullaby. The first time she heard it, she thought she was dreaming. The second time she listened more carefully. By the third night, she wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and stepped onto her porch beneath the moonlight. The forest stood silent. Silver fog drifted between the trees. The song continued. Then Clara saw him. A massive white wolf standing at the edge of the woods. Motionless. Watching the cottage. And singing. Clara should have been frightened. Any sensible person would have been. A wolf that large standing alone at the edge of the forest after midnight was the kind of sight that sent people locking doors and drawing curtains. Yet as she stood on her porch wrapped in a thick knitted blanket, fear was not the first thing she felt. Curiosity was. The song continued drifting through the cold autumn air. It was unlike anything she had ever heard before. There were no words she could understand, only a haunting melody that rose and fell with quiet emotion. It sounded lonely somehow. Not threatening. Not wild. Just sad. The white wolf remained perfectly still while it sang. Moonlight silvered its thick fur until it almost seemed unreal. Clara noticed how large it was, far bigger than any wolf she had ever seen. Its shoulders stood nearly level with the split-rail fence surrounding her vegetable garden. Yet there was something oddly gentle about the way it watched the cottage, as though it was searching for something it could not quite remember. Clara took a cautious step forward. The old porch boards creaked beneath her boots. Instantly the song stopped. The wolf lifted its head. For one suspended moment they simply stared at one another. Clara expected it to disappear into the trees. Instead it sat down. The movement was calm and deliberate. Then those pale silver eyes settled on her face. A strange sensation fluttered through her chest. Not recognition exactly. More like familiarity. Like hearing a song from childhood that you had forgotten existed. Neither of them moved. The wind stirred through the pines. Somewhere deeper in the forest an owl called softly. Finally Clara spoke. "Well, you are certainly not what I expected tonight." The wolf tilted its head. To her surprise, it almost looked confused. A tiny laugh escaped her lips. "You do realize most wolves are supposed to be scary, right?" The animal blinked slowly. Then, to Clara's amazement, it lowered itself onto the ground. Front paws crossed neatly, head resting between them. It looked less like a predator and more like a tired traveler stopping to rest. Minutes passed. Then another hour. Neither left. Eventually the chill became too much. Clara rubbed her hands together and sighed. "I am going inside." She hesitated. "You can stay if you want." The words felt ridiculous the moment they left her mouth. She was talking to a wolf. Yet somehow it seemed perfectly natural. Back inside the cottage, Clara poured herself a cup of chamomile tea and settled beside the window. The curtains remained open. Every few minutes she glanced outside. The white wolf was still there, watching quietly beneath the moonlight. Long after midnight, she finally drifted asleep in her rocking chair. The next morning sunlight spilled across the wooden floorboards. Clara woke with a stiff neck and hurried to the window. The clearing stood empty. No wolf. No tracks she could immediately see. Only the forest swaying gently beneath a bright blue sky. For a moment she wondered if she had imagined everything. But then she noticed something unusual near the porch steps. A cluster of white fur caught between two wooden boards. Clara stepped outside and carefully picked it up. The strands were impossibly soft. Real. Tangible. Proof. Her mysterious visitor had been there. 200 miles away, King Lucian Blackthorn sat through another council meeting fighting exhaustion. The voices around him blurred together. Reports. Trade agreements. Border disputes. None held his attention. Because resting across the arm of his throne was something that should not have been there. A single strand of white fur. The same color as moonlight. That night, Clara told herself she would not wait by the window. She had chores to finish, vegetables to preserve for winter, and enough firewood to stack for the coming week. Yet as darkness settled over Silverpine Forest and the first stars appeared above the treetops, she found herself glancing toward the porch every few minutes. The strange white fur rested on the kitchen table beside a lantern. Every time she looked at it, she remembered those silver eyes watching her from the moonlit clearing. By 11 o'clock the forest had fallen silent. The wind eased. Even the usual chorus of crickets seemed distant. Clara stirred the last embers in her fireplace and wrapped her favorite blanket around her shoulders. It was an old thing, handmade by her grandmother decades ago. Soft blue wool threaded with silver stitching along the edges. It carried memories of childhood winters and rainy afternoons, spent listening to stories beside the hearth. Midnight arrived. Then a few minutes passed beyond it. Just as disappointment began to settle in her chest, the music returned. The melody drifted through the darkness exactly as before. Gentle. Melancholy. Beautiful. Clara hurried to the window. There he was. The white wolf stood in nearly the same spot as the night before. Moonlight painted his fur silver. The song echoed softly across the clearing. This time Clara smiled. Somehow she was relieved to see him. She opened the front door and stepped outside. The wolf immediately stopped singing. His ears lifted. Clara remained on the porch. "You came back." The words felt surprisingly natural. The wolf stared at her for several seconds before slowly lowering himself onto the grass once again, as though he had done this many times before. The night air carried an unexpected chill. Autumn was giving way to early winter. Clara noticed the wolf shiver slightly when a cold breeze swept through the trees. It was subtle, but she saw it. Her expression softened. "You really should find better shelter." The wolf blinked. Clara glanced down at the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. It was warm, familiar, precious. For a moment she hesitated. Then she laughed quietly at herself. "I must be losing my mind." Before she could reconsider, she walked down the porch steps and placed the folded blanket near the edge of the clearing. The wolf watched every movement. Clara stepped back. "There. Just for tonight." Neither moved. Finally the wolf approached. Not cautiously. Not aggressively. Simply curious. He lowered his head and touched the blanket with his nose. Then something unexpected happened. The enormous creature carefully settled onto the wool and rested there. Clara felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. For the first time since her grandmother passed away, the blanket seemed to be exactly where it belonged. She watched until her eyes grew heavy. Eventually she returned inside and fell asleep beside the fire. The next morning sunlight poured through her curtains. Clara immediately hurried outside. The clearing was empty. The wolf was gone. So was the blanket. Hundreds of miles away, King Lucien Blackthorn woke abruptly in his royal chambers. His heart was racing. Something soft brushed against his hand. Confused, he looked down. Folded neatly across the foot of his bed lay a blue wool blanket stitched with silver thread. He had never seen it before in his life. Yet somehow, the scent of pine trees and wood smoke lingered in its fabric, and for the first time in months, he could remember hearing a woman laugh. Lucien stared at the blue blanket for a long time. The morning sunlight spilling through the tall windows of his chamber only made it appear more out of place. Nothing inside Blackthorn Keep escaped the attention of servants, guards, or advisors. Yet somehow an object that clearly belonged to someone else had appeared beside the king while he slept. He ran his fingers across the silver stitching. The craftsmanship was simple but careful. Handmade. Personal. Familiar in a way he could not explain. Closing his eyes, he tried to grasp the fading memory from moments earlier. A cottage. The scent of wood smoke. A woman's laughter carried on a cold breeze. Then it vanished, slipping through his thoughts like mist. A knock sounded at the door. "Enter," Lucien called. His advisor, Theodore Ashcroft, stepped inside carrying a stack of documents. The older man immediately noticed the blanket. "Your Majesty?" Lucien folded it casually. "Do you recognize this?" Theodore frowned. "No, sir." "Did anyone enter my chambers during the night?" "No one." The answer came without hesitation. The guards confirmed the hallway remained secure until dawn. Lucien studied his advisor carefully. Theodore was not lying. That only deepened the mystery. Later that afternoon, while court proceedings dragged through discussions of harvest taxes and winter supply routes, Lucien found his attention drifting repeatedly toward the folded blanket resting beside his throne. Several times he caught himself tracing the silver thread along its edge. It made no sense. Yet touching it eased the strange exhaustion that had followed him for months. Meanwhile, nearly 200 miles away, Clara spent her day distracted. Every task took twice as long as usual. She burned a batch of biscuits, forgot to gather eggs from the chicken coop, even watered the same section of her garden twice. Her thoughts kept returning to the missing blanket. She knew she should be upset. It had belonged to her grandmother. It was one of the few precious things she still owned. Yet strangely, she was not angry. The image of the white wolf curled peacefully atop the blanket lingered in her mind. As evening approached, gray clouds gathered above Silverpine Forest. The air carried the scent of approaching rain. Clara lit lanterns around the cottage and settled into her favorite chair with a book she barely managed to read. Every creak outside drew her attention toward the window. Midnight came and went. No song. No silver eyes watching from the clearing. Disappointment settled heavily in her chest. "Of course," she muttered softly. "It was only a wolf." Yet even as she said the words, she did not believe them. The storm arrived shortly after 1 o'clock. Rain tapped steadily against the roof. Wind rattled the windows. Clara was preparing to extinguish the lamps when she heard it. 3 soft knocks against the front door. Her heart skipped. Visitors did not come to her cottage in the middle of the night. For several seconds she simply stared toward the entrance. Then another knock sounded. Gentle, patient, almost familiar. Taking a lantern in one hand, Clara crossed the room and slowly opened the door. The storm swirled beyond the porch. Standing in the rain was the white wolf, and draped carefully across his back was her blue blanket. For several seconds neither of them moved. Rain drummed softly against the roof while cold wind swept across the clearing. Clara stood frozen in the doorway, lantern light spilling onto the porch. The white wolf remained where he was, water glistening across his silver fur. And resting carefully over his back was the blue blanket he had taken the night before. Somehow he had kept it clean despite the storm. Somehow he had brought it back. A slow smile touched Clara's face. You came all this way just to return it? The wolf tilted his head. His silver eyes seemed unusually bright in the darkness. Clara stepped aside and opened the door wider. You look soaked. The wolf glanced toward the warm glow inside the cottage, then back toward the forest, as though part of him wanted to leave while another part desperately wished to stay. It is your choice, Clara said softly, but I do have a fireplace. For a moment nothing happened. Then the enormous animal climbed the porch steps. Clara felt her breath catch. Up close he looked even larger than before. Yet there was no threat in him. Only exhaustion. Deep exhaustion. He crossed the threshold with surprising care, as if afraid of damaging something. The moment he entered, warmth from the fireplace wrapped around him. A faint shiver ran through his body. Clara closed the door behind them. There. Better already. The wolf lowered himself onto the rug near the fire. His eyes drifted half-closed. Clara took the blanket from his back and spread it beside him. Almost immediately he rested his head against it. The sight stirred something unexpectedly tender inside her. For the next hour she sat in her rocking chair while rain rattled against the windows. Occasionally she glanced toward her strange visitor. Each time she did she found him watching her. Not constantly. Not intensely. Just quietly. As though her presence brought him peace. Eventually Clara picked up the book she had abandoned earlier. I suppose if you are staying you might as well listen. She began reading aloud. The story was one her grandmother used to love. A tale about travelers searching for a home hidden beyond distant mountains. The wolf listened in complete silence. Every now and then his ears twitched when she reached an amusing part. By the time the final chapter ended, the storm had weakened. Clara yawned and set the book aside. Well, she whispered, that is enough adventure for one night. The wolf had already fallen asleep. His breathing was slow and steady. For the first time Clara noticed something unusual. Resting near one paw was a small mark in the fur. A crescent shape. Distinctive. Elegant. It seemed strangely familiar, though she could not remember where she had seen it before. Far away in Blackthorn Keep, King Lucian Blackthorn woke before dawn with a start. The blanket was still beside him, but that was not what made him sit upright. His gaze fell to his right hand. Just below his wrist, faintly visible against his skin, was a crescent-shaped smear of fireplace ash. Lucian stared at it in silence. Then slowly, almost unconsciously, he lifted his hand and caught the lingering scent of wood smoke. The following morning Clara could not stop thinking about the crescent-shaped marking she had seen near the wolf's paw. It lingered in her memory throughout breakfast and followed her into town later that afternoon. Silver Pine Village was small enough that everyone knew everyone. A single main street stretched between a bakery, a general store, and an aging library that had stood for nearly a century. Clara rarely visited unless she needed supplies, but today curiosity guided her steps. The library smelled of cedar shelves and old paper. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, illuminating drifting specks of dust. Clara greeted Mrs. Bennet, the elderly librarian, and wandered toward the history section. She was not entirely sure what she was searching for. Perhaps stories about unusual wolves. Perhaps local folklore. Perhaps simply an explanation for why a creature that should have frightened her instead felt strangely familiar. After nearly an hour of searching, she discovered a worn book filled with sketches of regional symbols and family crests. Turning one fragile page after another, she paused suddenly. Her pulse quickened. There it was. a crescent moon identical to the marking she had seen in the wolf's fur. Beneath the image appeared a single description. House Blackthorn, royal crest of the Northern Territories. Clara stared at the page. Her first instinct was to laugh at the absurdity. The symbol belonged to the Alpha King's family. The same crest appeared on royal coins and official documents throughout the kingdom. Yet somehow seeing it here unsettled her. She closed the book and reminded herself that many things could resemble a crescent moon. It meant nothing. It had to mean nothing. Still, she checked the book out and carried it home. Hundreds of miles away, Lucien spent the day, battling a different kind of unease. Since finding the blanket, fragments of unfamiliar memories had begun surfacing at unexpected moments. While reviewing military reports, he suddenly remembered the scent of lavender soap. During a meeting with ambassadors, he recalled the crackling sound of a cottage fireplace. None of it belonged to his life. None of it should have existed. Yet the memories felt real. That evening Theodore approached him with concern written across his face. "Your Majesty, you look better today." Lucien glanced up. "Better? You have more color than usual. More energy." Theodore hesitated. "You actually smiled during breakfast." Lucien blinked. "Did I?" The advisor looked genuinely shocked. "Twice." Later, alone in his chambers, Lucien unfolded the blue blanket once more. His fingers brushed the silver stitching. The moment he touched it, a strange calm settled over him. For the first time in months, the exhaustion eased completely. Outside his window, darkness slowly consumed the kingdom. Far away in her cottage, Clara sat beside the fire with the library book resting open on her lap. Rain clouds had disappeared. Stars glittered above Silverpine Forest. Midnight approached. Her gaze drifted repeatedly toward the door. She told herself she was only curious. Nothing more. Yet when the first distant notes of a familiar melody floated through the night air, her heart immediately lifted. And this time, before she stepped outside, Clara slipped the Royal Crest book beneath her arm. The moment Clara stepped onto the porch, the familiar melody drifted through the cold night air. The white wolf stood waiting in the clearing exactly where he always appeared. Moonlight shimmered across his fur while the forest remained hushed around him. This time, however, Clara carried the old library book beneath her arm. Her heart beat a little faster than usual. Not because she was afraid, but because she was beginning to suspect that the mystery standing before her was larger than she had ever imagined. The wolf noticed the book immediately. His silver eyes followed it as she approached. Clara sat on the porch steps and placed the volume beside her. "You are becoming a problem, you know that," she said softly. The wolf lowered himself onto the grass. Clara opened the book and flipped through several pages until she reached the illustration she had found earlier. Even in the dim moonlight, the crescent crest was unmistakable. She turned the page toward him. "Have you ever seen this before?" The wolf stared at the symbol. For a brief moment something changed. His ears twitched. His body became very still. Clara felt a strange chill run through her. It was almost as though he recognized it. Then the feeling vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The wolf looked away toward the trees. Clara released a slow breath. "I thought so." She closed the book. The night stretched comfortably around them. Neither seemed eager to leave. After a while, Clara began talking about ordinary things. Her garden, the first frost of the season, a pie recipe her grandmother used to make every autumn. The wolf listened quietly. Sometimes his eyes closed as though he simply enjoyed hearing her voice. Other times he watched her with an attentiveness that felt surprisingly human. Hours slipped by unnoticed. Somewhere deep in the forest, a branch snapped beneath the weight of an animal moving through the darkness. The wolf immediately lifted his head. Every muscle tightened. Clara followed his gaze but saw nothing unusual. "What is it?" she asked. The wolf remained alert for several seconds before gradually relaxing again. Yet Clara noticed something she had not seen before. He looked tired. Not physically tired. Something deeper. The kind of weariness that settled into a soul. Without thinking, she reached out her hand. The wolf hesitated. Then slowly, carefully, he moved closer. His head lowered until it rested beneath her fingertips. Clara froze. Warm fur brushed against her palm. The contact felt strangely familiar, as though some invisible thread had quietly connected them long ago. The wolf closed his eyes. For the first time since this strange friendship had begun, he seemed completely at peace. Hundreds of miles away in Blackthorn Keep, Lucian suddenly stopped walking in the middle of a hallway. His advisors nearly collided with him. A strange sensation washed over him. Warmth, calm, relief. The feeling was so vivid that he could almost feel a gentle hand resting against him. Theodore frowned. "Your Majesty?" Lucian stared ahead in silence. Then quietly, almost to himself, he said, "There is someone." The advisor blinked. "Someone, sir." But Lucian could not explain, because for the first time in months he no longer felt alone. The next evening arrived beneath a sky filled with bright winter stars. Clara spent the day pretending she was not waiting for nightfall, and she failed completely. By sunset she had already swept the porch twice, reorganized shelves that did not need organizing, and checked the clock more times than she could count. Somewhere deep inside, she knew something was changing, not only in her life, but in the strange connection that had quietly woven itself through the past several weeks. When midnight finally approached, the familiar melody floated from the forest once more. Clara stepped outside immediately. The white wolf stood beneath the moonlight waiting for her. Yet tonight there was something different about him. He seemed restless. His silver eyes repeatedly shifted toward the distant horizon. His ears twitched at sounds Clara could not hear. Even his song carried a note of uncertainty she had never noticed before. Clara walked down the porch steps. "You seem distracted tonight." The wolf lowered his head slightly. She sat beside him on the grass, wrapping her coat tighter against the cold. For a while neither spoke. The forest breathed softly around them. Then Clara opened the old crest book again. This time she turned beyond the royal family pages and deeper into the forgotten legends section. A folded sheet of parchment slipped free and landed in her lap. Frowning, she unfolded it. The handwriting was faded with age. Most of the text had become difficult to read. Yet one passage remained clear enough to understand. Clara's eyes moved slowly across the words. Her heartbeat quickened. The passage described an ancient condition known as a moonbound journey. According to the legend, certain wolves touched by powerful magic could leave part of themselves behind. During sleep, night after night their spirit would travel toward the one place where their soul felt safest, toward the one person capable of easing a hidden loneliness. Clara stared at the page. Then she looked at the wolf beside her. The wolf was already watching her. A strange silence settled between them. Suddenly the meaning of countless little mysteries seemed to shift. The blanket, the song, the way he always found the cottage, the way he listened whenever she spoke, the way she never felt afraid around him. Before Clara could gather her thoughts, the wolf rose to his feet. He looked toward the trees once more. This time his expression carried urgency. Then something extraordinary happened. For the briefest moment, moonlight struck his eyes at exactly the right angle. Clara caught a flash of another face, hidden somewhere beneath the wolf she knew. A face she had never seen before and yet somehow recognized. Tall, strong, silver-eyed, noble. The image vanished instantly. Clara inhaled sharply. The wolf froze. Neither moved. Hundreds of miles away, Lucian woke abruptly from sleep. His heart thundered inside his chest. For the first time he remembered more than fragments. A porch, a blue blanket, a woman sitting beneath the stars holding an old book. And then he remembered her face. Clear as daylight. Lucian sat upright in stunned silence. Across the kingdom, Clara whispered the same question at exactly the same moment. "Who are you?" The answer arrived sooner than either of them expected. At sunrise, King Lucian Blackthorn summoned every scholar, historian and royal archivist within Blackthorn Keep. For hours they searched forgotten records while Lucian described the fragments he remembered. The cottage, the blue blanket, the silver pine trees, the woman whose voice somehow reached him even when he could not remember her name. Near noon, an elderly archivist finally uncovered a journal more than 2 centuries old. Its pages described the moonbound journey in greater detail than any surviving legend. Lucian read every word himself. The final passage made his breath catch. When a soul travels repeatedly to the same place, the journey ends only when the Traveler willingly follows the path while awake. Lucien stared at the sentence for a long time. Then he closed the book and rose from his chair. For the first time in months, certainty replaced confusion. He knew exactly where he needed to go. 3 days later, Clara stood outside her cottage watching snow drift gently across the clearing. The white wolf had not appeared since the night she glimpsed the face hidden within his eyes. The silence felt wrong. Empty. She tried convincing herself that life would return to normal. It never did. Every songbird reminded her of his midnight melodies. Every winter breeze carried memories of silver fur beneath moonlight. Then just after noon she heard approaching horses. Clara frowned. Visitors almost never came this far into the forest. A carriage emerged between the trees followed by several riders wearing dark cloaks marked with a familiar crescent crest. Her heart immediately began to race. The carriage stopped. For a moment nothing happened. Then the door opened. A tall man stepped into the snow. Dark coat. Silver-gray eyes. Quiet strength. Clara recognized him instantly despite never having met him before. She had seen those eyes beneath moonlight countless nights. Neither spoke at first. Snowflakes drifted slowly between them. The world seemed strangely still. Finally Lucien smiled. It was not the practiced smile of a king greeting subjects. It was the smile of someone who had finally reached home after a very long journey. "I know this sounds impossible," he said softly, "but I think I have been visiting your cottage for months." Clara laughed before she could stop herself. Relief flooded through her so suddenly that tears threatened to appear. "You have." Lucien glanced toward the porch where the blue blanket rested beside the door. Recognition immediately crossed his face. "I thought so." For hours they talked beside the fireplace. They shared stories, compared memories, pieced together every mystery that had connected them. By evening the final pieces finally fit together. The exhaustion that had haunted Lucien disappeared completely. The loneliness Clara had carried since losing her grandmother seemed lighter. Somehow, as though an empty space inside both of them had quietly been filled. Later that night they stepped onto the porch together. Snow covered the clearing in silver light. The forest stood peaceful around them. Lucien looked toward the moonlit trees and smiled. "I never knew I was searching for someone." Clara glanced up at him. "And yet you found your way here every night." His eyes softened. "Perhaps some part of me already knew." Somewhere in the distance, a wolf's song drifted through the winter air. Gentle, beautiful, familiar. This time neither of them stood alone while listening to it.